Reapered might be one of the most sought after pieces coming into the 2021 offseason. And I think if teams end up deciding that maybe he is too much of a risk in terms of picking him up because of his past flaws or whatnot, I think that is kind of a grave mistake, and teams are going to be regretting that into the 2021 season if they do so. And that is because everyone is probably trying to remember, of course, him dropping the ball in the summer split of 2020, where Cloud9 were undefeated in the beginning half of the summer split and then just completely dropped the ball in the second half. And it was clearly due to a misalignment of the coaching staff's vision on how they saw the meta, and maybe just playing not towards their team's strength and picking weird picks like Senna and Wukong bot lane and shit. And it was clear that it was a fault of the coaching staff themselves, and not kind of focusing on the fundamentals or just the strengths of what made Cloud9 a great team during the beginning of the summer split. And so I think, yeah, you can most certainly hold that back from them, and that, seemingly Cloud9 was kind of destined to win the summer split, right? Especially with how dominant that they were in the spring split. And one could say maybe like the only thing that would stop them from winning summer was like some divine intervention shit, right? Which, I mean, kind of is what happened though, right? So, I mean, with COVID coming down and whatnot, it seemed to put a pretty big hamper on Reapered's split. I'm not going to blame it on that though, but it's a very unfortunate year for Reapered, because if you look into how dominant that Cloud9 were in the spring split, everyone was expecting them to completely destroy when it came to MSI. And I think if MSI were to actually have taken place, Cloud9 would have actually done quite well. A lot of analysts were saying, Cloud9 looked like one of the strongest teams in the world. We're expecting at least semifinals for this team. They're very dominant right now. And this was looking like one of the times to where North America was actually having one of the most competitive teams in the world. And if you put that into context, and maybe if that tournament would have happened, that would have been kind of a anchor point for Reapered's resume to say, hey, I didn't necessarily win summer split, or even then, maybe that would have been a carrying on point to where they would have carried that momentum a little bit further in the summer split and at least made playoffs. Who knows? But that at least would have been something to put on Reapered's resume to say, hey, maybe you should keep me for the 2021 split on Cloud9. Who knows? But as far as why I think Reapered's value is still marketable in a sense, and why teams shouldn't necessarily give up on him, is because he at least gets you to the finish line, right? Like, I'm not saying that he necessarily gets you over it now, but that's at least 90% of the work. He just has to work on this other 10% factor, which he has worked on within the spring split, and then, let's carry on into 2021. And I think realistically, maybe this might be something to kind of knock him over the head and say, okay, you actually do need to work on your weaknesses as a coach, and to kind of further better how you approach coaching these different players, and maybe what team comps you want to build or drafts you want to build, and what your team actually wants to do as well too. And I just think fundamentally, Reapered would be a fantastic coach if he just reined in his cockiness just a little bit to where those best of fives, he doesn't pick something fucking super wacky in game 5 and botch a draft, right? And by the way, I'm tired of the bullshit to where, players or maybe coaches will put off the blame of the draft and it's not all the coach or whatever. But realistically, you can say, especially with Reaper's track record of best of fives, that it's clear that he is one of the big elements as to why they lose best of fives so consistently. But second of all, that summer split is one of those moments to where you say, well, this team wasn't practicing these picks. They weren't playing the play style that they should have been playing. They should have been focusing on maybe these other meta picks and whatnot, and they just completely dropped the ball from a like preparation standpoint, which is specifically what the coaching staff is supposed to do, right? So I don't think you can just off-put that blame from Reapered. Now, considering that, I also think Reapered, one of his big values is, his eccentric picks. Like, I mean, even as a player, he was known for his eccentric picks and just his thoughts on the game. I mean, he was like a Wukong main before in LCK, and he just had this general philosophy about the game that never really seemed to align with his teammates. I mean, you can even look back in his Azubu days, right? So both as a player and as a coach, he's always seemed to have this disconnect to the general philosophy about the game and how it should be played, with the general consensus and whatnot. And that's even more portrayed when you heard that interview with Jensen. I forgot if it was, I think it might have been Summoning Insight, to where he was talking about how he didn't necessarily agree with some of the drafts that Reapered was doing, especially in best of fives and whatnot. So it's very clear that I think with all the evidence and whatnot, that Reapered does have a problem with controlling the draft too much, or maybe controlling the play style or the picks that his players do. And I'd like to make the comparison between him and Grabs. Now, I know that's a bit of a stretch when you think about just the titles and just kind of the pedigree and whatnot, but bear with me. And the fact that Grabs, he allows his players to play these eccentric picks, right? Like you hear all the time that G2 want to end up playing this certain champion, even though that they don't have much practice on it, but one of the players kind of suggests it, and Grabs it's just like, yeah, fuck it, like go for it. I trust you guys. You guys seem to know what you're doing. But in other ways, now Reapered is the one suggesting that. He's the one kind of being cocky in that sense. And so you're left with this weird dichotomy to where he's making maybe his players feel uncomfortable versus the players on G2 are making Grabs feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'd much rather have that situation in that sense. And that's also showing that Grabs is maybe willing to let a little bit more control go over to the players. And now maybe that might be because of the experience that his team has and that he trusts that. But Reapered himself, it seems as though he's not putting that trust within his players, which now I don't believe that all of this is a fatal flaw in that sense. And actually, I think you can see that he's better with younger players. And I think that's in essence where his strengths lie, is that he can teach and bring up a team and kind of put a little bit more of that authority in exactly what this team is going to play, what their picks are, what their team comp is, what they're going to practice within solo queue or within scrims and whatnot. He can kind of control that and build that team up to a high pedigree team, as it were. So I think Reapered still has a lot left in the tank, a lot of gas left in the tank to be of good service to any top tier team, but more so a top tier team that is willing to invest in a couple of new talents. And I think Reapered is the perfect coach for that, and the perfect coach also to be the one that kind of builds up your organization from the foundation up, because he has actually been one of the mentors to end up raising up a lot of these younger players to become really good players at the very end of the day. So I think he can do that again, especially for another org, another top tier org. And if that's the direction that they want to do and have the general manager work with Reapered in order to build that type of infrastructure, I actually think that's where his biggest value is building up that infrastructure and not necessarily winning you a ton of championships, but kind of getting you onto the way to do that And then, maybe if he works on his flaws and whatnot to where he gets more experience with veteran players, he's actually able to win those championships now and kind of get you the greatness for your organization. So I think in essence, Reapered is a great gamble. That's like a 20% chance to lose, at the game of League of Legends as an organization. So I think he's a big pickup. People shouldn't be sleeping on him. Teams shouldn't be sleeping on him. And I just think he has a lot more left to prove within the LCS and even in the LCK if they're looking to kind of bring in new ideas and fresh ideas, which clearly LCK is kind of going through this renaissance of new ideas and new play styles and just new forms of thought. So I don't think it's quite outlandish that he could even go into the LCK. They just kind of have to accept that he is one of the more eccentric coaches that they're going to have over there. So overall, I think Reapered is going to be great for an organization from an organization standpoint, and don't just focus on the 5 players that he's going to be culminating in that aspect, but rather just how he's going to build up your organization entirely.